Regular meeting of the River Falls Board of Education. The meeting has been properly notified, and we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have any visitors or delegations who would like to address the board this evening? It does not look like it. So it's our good fortune to move into informational items, and the first one is an exciting Wildcat Pride Award. So Bo.
All right, come on up. So this is our Wildcat Pride Certificate, proudly presented to Audrey Johnson. I'm going to put these on so I don't mess up too badly. The School District of River Falls School Board would like to commend you for your exceptional efforts in the classroom. You create an environment where students can express themselves and guide them towards success as young artists while fostering trust in the learning process. Students and families from Rocky Branch Elementary are fortunate to have you. You are a true ambassador of Wildcat Pride. Congratulations.
One thing really quick, the person who nominated Audrey had a statement that I think would be good to read. So Audrey facilitates absolutely wonderful projects for students. She offers students room to express themselves creatively while staying within a very intentional and desired theme of her lesson. Student artwork adorns the hallways, and it's impossible to ignore. Bright pink flamingos with long twisted necks stare at you with wild eyes. Three-dimensional masks painted and ordained with trinkets, ribbon, and wire. They run the spectrum from wholesome to fantastic. Various species of black fish prints. The nominator doesn't really know if she uses real fish, but they look real. Contrasting and explosive tie-dye backgrounds. She doesn't do anything less than 110%. And she makes space for kids to express themselves, leading them towards success as young artists while fostering a trust in the process. We're lucky to have her, so thank you very much.
That's great. So as school board members, we are reluctant to just show up at schools, so we like people to invite us. So would you invite me sometime to come over to your classroom and see? I would love to see
She
it.
lives across the street.
I do.
So she could be there in 3 minutes.
That's right. If you need another set of hands, I am right there for you.
Perfect.
So, well, and Henry and Andrew, I hope that you're really proud of your mom, because this is a pretty great thing.
It is a big deal.
Yeah, it is a very big deal. So, thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
All right, we now have a superintendent
You don't have to-
report.
thank you.
Yeah. Welcome to, but you don't
Her
have to.
significant other. Is that her husband?
Is this your husband?
Yes.
I would
Well, you-
stay, but
I
I
don't
don't
know
go to
this
city
guy.
council.
Well, you should acknowledge.
I will stay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
All right.
All right, on to the superintendent report. So we are, I think the theme pretty clearly for July is planning. And so what I thought is I would give you just a broad update on some of the planning items that we're preparing for the upcoming school year, really focused on the connections to board work and connections to the strategic plan. So obviously, there's a whole bunch of other planning that I'm not going to reference in today's update. So I was just trying to zero in on things that I think the board would find interesting that are continuations of work that we're doing already. So touch a little bit on our focus on student success, touch a little bit on governance, and touch a little bit on organizational alignment, and where we're looking at district-wide systems that address critical areas that connect back to student success. So when we're talking about student success this year, we're really still zeroed in on that strategic plan, and the theme is next steps, not new steps. And so we've done a lot of great planning in the first 3 years of the strategic plan, and we want to continue those steps and moving forward towards that goal without diverting from what we know is the key priorities. And so our goals remain the same, and those are listed there. And the way that we address those goals is in a disciplined manner. So we've kept these kind of principles of discipline at the forefront as we engage in this planning. We really are focusing on what's the most important work and recognizing that if we have two priorities, that means we have no priorities. And I'll tell you what, that's an easy thing to say, and it's a very, very hard thing to execute, because there are a lot of things that can be very important in a school district to plan for. And if you spread out those priorities too much, you can find yourself in a challenging situation. So we've been really intentional at the admin level, and I know at the building levels when they plan around that topic. And that also means being specific and measurable, not just in our wildly important goals, but in the other planning efforts that we have. We focus on what's in our circle of influence, and that's when we talk about lead measures, things that are predictive and actionable towards our goals. And then we keep track, and we share how we're keeping track widely, and we're doing that not for blame or for shame or to call out areas where we haven't made progress or to pat ourselves on the back too much when things are going well, but it's a part of our process to make sure that we're staying focused on the most important things. And then that breeds that cadence of accountability, and I'll talk a little bit about how the board fits into that. So next week at the at the school board retreat, we will take some time to review the completed district scorecard. Remember, the district scorecard is not the school report card. The school report card is put forth by the DPI and focused on a very small set of tests. Our district scorecard is a reflection of the strategic plan, and it's focused on the three big areas within the strategic plan: ensuring that students are learning at high levels, making sure that we're connecting and having an engaging and learning environment for students, and that our workplace for our employees is supportive and collaborative. And as you recall, we have a number of key performance indicators that we'll give an update on next week. We've used that scorecard. Our admin team has looked at that scorecard results, and that's been a key element along with other data in planning for the upcoming school year. The other thing I wanted to highlight is, just like last year, we'll have a monthly monitoring calendar where updates related to the scorecard will be an element of the school board meeting. That's a key way that we keep our cadence of accountability. So this month, we're giving a planning update. Over August and September, through committee processes, our central office administrators will provide their goals and how that links to the strategic plan. By September, we'll have that final scorecard update with all of the spaces filled and finalize the monitoring calendar. And then we begin our wildly important goal updates as well as other key reports. Any questions on that? Okay, another thing that I wanted to highlight is our transition to Neola. So we took some steps over a few months in the spring to move towards Neola as our policy services guidance resource. And so we now have to go through the process of transitioning to Neola. So I wanted to highlight a couple of components that go with this. So we are moving from one set of policies to a new set of policies. But it's not like we're changing every single policy and the wording on every single policy. In addition, as we go through this process, we are going to be talking, I know you're excited to hear this, Mike, we're going to be talking about policies pretty much every single month. But when you transition from where we are now to Neola, that process, you do all of the talking and approval in advance, and then you make the full transition to the Neola policies. Our goal is to do that basically a year from now. So although we'll be engaged in discussing the updated Neola policies throughout the school year, the current school board policies guide the district until all the Neola policies are approved. And a big component of that is we're going to see some policies being renumbered. But current policies that were recently updated or added will be used where there is alignment or when there is alignment. So that piece is important to note. And an obvious question might be, well, Dave, what if, you've got attendance as a policy that we're going to talk about today, and there might be another policy that comes up, and that is fine. The work that we do for those, what I'll call one-off policies, those policies, if approved, will go into effect immediately after that second approval. And then when we catch them on the Neola work, they will be one of those aligned policies that just immediately without change will be renumbered and put in the right place. So we feel that way we can do the discussion about the transition in a time and space that allows us to have that discussion, but address the immediate needs of any policies that need to be addressed. I'm gonna go into greater detail next week at the retreat, but I just was gonna highlight the steps that we will use for each policy series prior to having them approved. So the first thing that will happen is that the admin team will review it, and that admin team will consist potentially of Amanda and myself and any other administrator that's impacted. So obviously, when we're looking at personnel policy series, there's 2 different personnel policy series in Neola, then Nate will be involved, finance and facilities, Lynette, anything instructional related, our co-directors of academic services will be involved, and obviously our principals would be involved at a lot of those steps as well. In addition to any other stakeholders that we would want to collect feedback from. That's the first piece, and then the next piece, after we've done our review per series, then we'll go to a drafting meeting with the Neola representative. If you remember, that's a key kind of foundational component to why we transitioned to Neola, and that allows us to have an expert who's a retired superintendent in Wisconsin review them, as well as Neola's legal counsel to review those policies. We feel like after those 2 steps, we're hopefully in what we'll call kind of a nearly final stage. A lot of the questions around alignment to state statute and correct language around that should be clarified at that point. And then the next 2 steps are kind of the recommendation of how we'll move forward. And my recommendation will provide more detail at a later date on this at the retreat, and then final approval in August is to call an ad hoc policy committee for this year, for this school year. And that ad hoc policy committee would be responsible for going through each month a series. And I'll explain in detail how we'll kind of manage that, because that's a lot of information. Essentially, that policy committee will have that initial view of it and allow us to kind of identify the policies that are our highest priority to review and have conversations about, and be ready for that full first and second reading recommendation. Couple things to clarify, just like our other committee meetings, even if you're not a member of the policy committee, you would have notice and be able to attend, and if you have questions.
You can come anyway, Mike.
Yeah, yes. And all kidding aside, Mike, there might be certain series where Mike would have a strong interest in, and we would rely on his feedback, and this would be an opportunity for him to see it. In addition, there's a lot of policies, right? So we'll give you ample time to review them. So the first 2 the admin team review and the drafting meeting with Neola means that they'll be in a really good place. So we can give you a couple weeks to look at them, to review and have questions. So that's kind of the general outline. I'm gonna give a more detailed description next week, but I just wanted to I know there's been some questions about it, so I wanted to make sure. Are there any general broad?
Yeah, Dave, just in case there's anybody in the audience who's trying to figure out what's this Neola thing, because they're new to it.
Yeah.
So my simple understanding of this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we're not adopting Neola's board policies. In other words, we're not adopting a new set of policies. These are our policies. We're updating our policies. Neola is a resource, a process of support materials for us, and a place to house and access all of our policies in a better way. So it's where we're going to move our policies to, but they're also a resource to help us do this. So it's going to be much more efficient, better for the community and parents and teachers and everybody, I think, to understand and do this. So I didn't want anybody to think that we're dumping our policies and picking up a whole new set.
That's
And they'll
right.
still reflect the values of the board and reflecting the values of the school district.
Yep, and moving forward, once we do this big transition, one of the really positive elements of Neola is a really efficient, ongoing policy update process. In other words, they'll, through a very specific process, twice a year, help us identify the policies that need to be reviewed. And sometimes a policy might need to be updated after only 1 year based on federal changes, state changes, or because Neola is a policy services company, they also have the knowledge of what are other districts doing. And again, to your point, it doesn't mean we have to adopt every single policy that they recommend us looking at, but it gives us a chance to be engaged in that conversation on a very systematic way. And then the last piece I touched on was organizational alignment, and I think the piece here is, we're always looking at how we can develop systems and how we can create a common vision around these systems in which the school leaders, educators, and all staff understand how these systems connect and their role within the system, and set a vision so that when we communicate to students and when we communicate to families, there's alignment in the messaging and the vision. And so a few things that we've talked about this summer that we want to make sure that we're really strongly aligned. And that, when I say aligned, I mean every stakeholder understands how these things connect to their work, and then we can consistently communicate to students and families. Some examples of the things that we'll be looking at is our overall attendance policy. Everybody understands that attendance is a critical element to student success, so we want to make sure that we're very clear and tight on how we value attendance, the ways that we communicate with families about the importance of attendance, and then how we handle all the nitty-gritty ins and outs of absences and excused absences and all those fun things. In addition, the center graphic represents MLSS, Multi-Level Systems of Support, and this represents how we respond when data is telling us a student is struggling. Maybe they're struggling academically, or maybe they're struggling with some behavioral needs, and how we respond, how we systemically respond, or how we intervene to support that student. We want to be consistent with that. So we're having a lot of conversations about how at every level the framework is similar. It doesn't mean that the MLSS for a kindergarten student is going to look the same as the MLSS for an 11th grader, but systemically and broad strokes, the framework is similar enough for all of us to kind of understand how we fit into that. So that's another theme you'll see throughout the year. The graphic on the right shows a framework or a set of policy recommendations from DPI around cell phone usage and how to navigate that within school districts. And I represent that because that's some conversation that's happened at the board, and we want to have organizational alignment around that. Specifically at the high school, there's been lots of conversation, so that's more to come, but that's another example of organizational alignment. So there's clarity from classroom to classroom, from building administrator to teacher, from school board, all through that we kind of understand what is our vision for this and how are we executing that vision. The last graphic there is educator effectiveness. That's the statewide system for how we evaluate teachers. And we want to be clear for our teachers on what we value within that system and how we're going to use it to support their growth. And make sure that we're not having some level of a moving target, and it's consistent from building to building. So those are some things that you're going to see. Hopefully you see the connections to student success and governance, so it doesn't feel like it's more. But this is the direction and some highlights of what's happening for the planning, and so more to come as the year starts.
Thank you very much. All right, we are going to move into action items, and the first thing would be minutes, bills, and employment recommendations. So we have before us tonight the meeting minutes from the June 16th regular Board of Education meeting. We have bills that have been submitted for payment, as well as recommendations regarding employment. So is there a motion to approve minutes, bills, and employment as presented?
So moved.
Thank you, Lindsay. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Monica. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? The motion is carried. All right, we have a report from the Educational Program Committee as well as recommendations regarding action, and I'll turn to you, Alan.
The Education Programs Committee met on Monday, July 14th, and we had a number of presentations and that we had to act on, and that came in front of the board here. And Mary Beth Elliott helped guide us through this very well. But we took it in 3 sections. So we had a presentation about behavior management at each level, elementary, middle school, and high school, 3 different presentations. And then we had presentations about changes and suggested changes for the student handbooks at both the elementary, middle school, and high school level, as well as the athletic activities handbooks at the middle school and high school. We had our principals here, Brian Buck and Mark Chapin from the middle school. We had Kate Scapel from, principal from Greenwood, representing the elementary principals. And we had Lisa Goyle from, assistant principal from the high school, representing the high school and doing that presentation for us. The actions that we took on these, and we had lots of conversation, lots of discussion about the proposed changes. The one handbook that was separate and we'll take up separately tonight is the Renaissance Charter Academy. And that one we'll talk about tonight. We talked about it a little bit on Tuesday, but we did not take action on it. And that's coming right directly to the board tonight. So I think that what I'd like to do is take action items 1 through 5, which is the approval of the student handbooks at each level, and then the athletic activities handbooks at the middle school and high school, all as one motion if we can. Do I have a motion to approve those?
Are you making that motion?
I'll make that motion to approve those.
Perfect. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
Thank you, Allison. Questions or comments? Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is carried.
Okay, and then this is an annual thing, but we have to act on our, the academic standards that our curriculum addresses during the year. And these have to be very specific. They're available on our website for anyone who wants to see them. We had a good presentation, discussion about it. Mary Beth led us through this, talked about it with us. And these are the standards used as a guide for our classroom instructions. They're adopted and used by teachers to do their curriculum mapping, instructional units, and classroom assessments. This is a required notice. In other words, annually, the state requires us to take action, to review this and take action on it based on Act 55. And so I'm going to move that we approve the academic standards as presented and discussed at the committee meeting for 25-26.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Monica. Questions or comments? Any clarifications?
Just one.
Yes, please.
This is a fascinating document, the one with all the hyperlinks in it, that you can go to all these different standards at the state level. I mean, you could spend all day looking. I looked through a few of them.
You could spend a couple days.
You could. And so I'm just curious. So these apply to all public schools in the state of Wisconsin. And I would imagine that one of the nice things about it is that if you move, there's, your child learned this in these grade levels. So how do they align with other states? That's one question. And we don't have to answer these questions. I'm just curious. Do they align with other states, and are these kind of consistent nationally, the standards? And then how about students who attend private schools? Do they have very similar standards? I know homeschooling, we can't really ask them even. But private schools, do they comply with kind of similar standards, or don't we know?
They don't have to comply with the standards because they don't receive state funding. And as a school board, you adopted them and said, this is what we're using for our standards. So it's local controlled. So
Right.
Wisconsin Department of Education, Department of Public Instruction says, here are the standards that we recommend for grade levels based on subject. They go through a review cycle. And then they are updated and out for public review at specific cycles. And then we adopt them as a local River Falls
Okay.
School District. But every district doesn't have to adopt them.
Okay.
I think most districts do adopt them.
Yeah.
I don't know any that go off. I talked a little bit last week about the health standards specifically haven't been revised for many, many years. So some districts will adopt the national standards, so they're not the same state to state.
Okay.
If you want to
interesting.
have more discussion, I'm really happy to talk
Yeah,
about it.
it's really-
Annette doesn't want to hear
Well, it's super
the
interesting.
history of standards, but I can fill you in
Oh,
on
yeah.
it.
Great, thank you. Thank you. I know in some of the things I'm familiar with, it's, you have a standard and you may add to it, you may make it more, what would you say, rigorous, but you may not subtract from it.
Right.
And I was just wondering if there was anything like that in Wisconsin. But whatever, it's just a question.
The big takeaways from this, because this has been forever a big topic. There was a movement in the early 2000s for Common Core standards, which was really part of the vocabulary.
Yep.
Those became very politically charged, and local control, local districts and states really pushed back, and there was lots of argument about them. But Wisconsin has set these standards. They aren't uniform between states. Generally, I think there's some things about math and other things that state to state agree on, what 10 plus 10 is. But beyond that, there's a lot of latitude among the states on this. But more specifically in Wisconsin, you asked the question about, do private schools have to adopt these? No. And nor do independent charter schools, nor is there the accountability that follows, right? I'm looking at Mary Beth.
Well, charter schools in the state of Wisconsin, it's different than other schools. It depends on who is authorizing them. And the law in the state of Wisconsin is you have to be authorized by a school district or a university. I
Right.
don't know a lot of universities or school districts that would not recommend that they follow. I mean, here, we have 2 charter schools, our alternative education at the high school at RCA. It's a little bit different, but they do still use standards. They do all of our state testing,
Yeah.
as well as Montessori does too.
I'm sorry, yeah.
So,
But voucher schools, which you ask about private schools, not all private schools are voucher schools. Voucher schools do not have to adopt these standards?
no.
Even though they're receiving state funds.
The private schools, like in Milwaukee, Lynette, you're shaking your head, she would probably
They
know.
do not, and even if they're accepting state funds through the voucher program.
Even if they're
not.
accepting voucher students, they don't, yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Good to know.
So it's one of the challenges we run into in Wisconsin about publicly funded schools that don't have to adopt standards. But I think to your point, this is about local control, which is why our board gets to look at these, review these, and vote on them.
Yeah.
Good questions.
Yeah, thank
Anything
you.
else? All right, we have a motion that's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you, everyone. Finance and facilities, and I'll turn to you, Mike.
All right, we had our meeting as part of our triple header last week. The first item that we discussed was our facility project update. If you have visited any of our schools in the recent past, a lot of activity. It's amazing what they can get done over a 3 to 4 month time frame, and it's going well. We're on schedule, we're on budget. At the high school, we've got our first big completion was our gymnasium the floor has been redone and it's got new graphics on it. The new bleachers are coming in this week. We've moved the equipment, the weight room equipment back into the weight room. I think the kids took care of that last week.
They helped, they
They
did not do
helped.
all of it.
They did not do it all.
They're there to help with.
We had a lot of
very
support.
minor
Right,
things.
so we got the weight room back in order, and so that project, that new addition is coming along very well. We had some nice pictures in our packet from last week, so we discussed some new security doors. One of the big changes in the main high school area would be security doors that we're gonna have, that's gonna separate the classroom wings from kind of the commons area for security purposes, and also we can shut those doors when we have events at the high school, the gym, and in the commons area. We can shut those and keep people out of our classroom areas, so everything's going on schedule there. At the bus garage, same thing, we're kind of in that same time frame where we're kind of got the shell done, and we're working on the inside, completing all the interior of it. And at the other schools, we're doing the mechanicals, and I know they're torn up pretty good, and trying to get those done before the school starts, so. That was the first item that we discussed. We also then went into our budget update. It's a kind of an interesting time of year because it's our year end. End of June is our fiscal year end, so there's a lot of gymnastics that takes place between the 2 fiscal years. So there's sometimes we book money, for example, we book money as being paid for our last year's fiscal budget, but we haven't got the money yet. So we have to book money coming in from our tax receipts that we actually don't get until August, would be an example. There's other things that, while we had it on our budget for last year, the expenses, we don't have the work completed and the bills paid until this next fiscal year. So we have to kind of move some money around and make it so they all add up at the end, so. But everything other than that was from the budget standpoint, it's going as according to plan, and we're doing well. We then discussed a capital improvement Fund 46, which is something we started probably 6-8 years ago, where you put money in to a fund that you can use then for capital improvements. So sometimes when we have extra funds at the end of the school year, we can move, that we've budgeted for capital improvements, we can put it into a kind of a savings account that we can use in future years. So there was a 5-year window that we had to start the fund, but couldn't use the funds until that 5 years was up, but we have now reached that 5 years. So we're looking at transferring some funds from this last year's budget that was for capital improvements, and we're gonna be adding that. It looks like 850,000 is where we landed. Last week was 750, but it was kind of a question mark.
That's correct.
So, did you want to discuss that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give a little background on Fund 46. So Fund 46 is available for districts to use. As it's stated in the title of the fund, it's a long-term capital improvement, and they use trust fund, even though it's not a traditional trust fund. Really what it means is we have to hold those funds separately. They can't be in the same bank account as any of our other funds, totally separate. And then they are actually, once they're transferred or in Fund 46, they can't be used for any other purpose other than aligned with an already approved capital projects plan. And that goes to the board and can be updated, but it has to be approved by the board. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So one of the things that we've been doing in our budget every year is we do budget for maintenance projects. And this past year, we budgeted about $650,000 for maintenance projects. Some are capital projects, sometimes we use those terms interchangeably. And those projects are still going. So as Mike mentioned, we haven't been able to pay those projects out. And so that makes up the large chunk of the recommended transfer of the $850,000. The other is really what I would consider a very small surplus in our budget, which was I could attribute to additional interest earnings. We hadn't really anticipated that interest rates would continue to kind of stay up there. So we had some additional interest earnings, and then just other little areas where we were underspent in budget. So we're really glad to be able to recommend the transfer and continue that fund in Fund 46. And I have the history here of the transfers that have been made over the course of when the district brought on Fund 46. And so, again, once those funds are transferred there, they are considered an expenditure for our general fund when we make the transfer. And then when those are spent out of Fund 46, obviously, that's not part of our shared cost. It's not part of our expenses for aid or anything like that for the following year. And I did also, we have a copy of what was approved last year for our capital improvement plan, and we will be bringing that again for review and updating to the Finance and Facilities Committee and then to the board for approval of an updated plan. So, any questions, anything I've missed with Fund 46?
The extra $100,000 was just, like you had mentioned, it was extra interest that we weren't really planning on, and
Yeah.
like that, correct?
Yeah, so last week, I
Yep.
gave you an estimate of
Yep.
$750. We were still, we made a final check run today, and those are expenses we had to post back to 24, 25. So I really needed to wait until that final check run to see where we were landing with the final budget. So
Thank you.
that's why the change.
So these are funds that are not part of the referendum funds, but still projects that need to get done. Example would be the pool, right? Aren't we doing a pretty big project to the pool this summer? We're doing some,
No pool work that's coming from
It wasn't the
capital
pool.
improvement,
Oh,
no.
okay.
So, let's see, we've got the work at Greenwood, the soffit work that's gonna be happening this summer
Right.
at Greenwood, the gym floor that you mentioned, the bleachers, those are all the things, or a couple of the things that were
Right.
that are on that list.
and then this fund, this capital improvement Fund 46 allows us then to pay for those projects
Correct.
in future years for money that we're putting away.
And not
So-
every district has a Fund 46.
Right.
It's optional, it was made available to districts, I would say, in the last 10 years, I think, when it first became available. And so not every district.
And it allows us to be more consistent with our purchases and with our expenditures.
It does, and it's different than if you were to leave it in the general fund, if you have a surplus and you leave it in general fund and you assign or commit.
Yeah.
Those require board action based on our policy. But those can also be unassigned and uncommitted with subsequent board action.
Right.
Whereas Fund 46, once it's there,
Right.
it's there.
As long as it's being used for what it was
Can't be
intended,
used for
which is
cash
capital
flow
improvement,
purposes
right.
or anything like that, it's.
Maintenance
it's
items on
just there.
our buildings and our facilities.
Correct.
Fantastic. So we have, I'll make a motion to approve the 24-25 transfer of $850,000 to Fund 46 for capital improvement.
Thank you. Before I take this, okay, all right.
It's okay?
Nope, Mike, okay. Lynette, did you want to say anything about the 2025-27 budget update?
Oh,
That's
absolutely.
coming,
yeah.
that's coming later,
Oh, we have?
right? That's
It's,
after the,
he will, in his summary, he will address it, but there was no action taken on it.
Oh, I know that.
So
okay.
It's coming up.
right.
Okay, all right, sorry about that.
problem.
Okay, so we have a motion that's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is carried. All right. Now, is there a motion to, do you want to talk about the bus?
Right.
Okay,
Yep.
all right.
So, yeah, the next thing on our agenda item was, every year we look at our vehicles and our buses, and we generally make a purchase or two of buses or Suburbans, or whatever whatever we need in the fleet. And so this year, we're adding a bus, a route bus, that we have identified for $145,784. So I will make a motion to approve the purchase of one route bus from Nelson's Bus Service in the amount of $145,784.
Thank
Second.
you. Thank you both.
You said we're adding a bus. To be clear, we're replacing a bus, right? Or is this going to be an additional bus?
Yeah, so it really depends, and I'm sorry I don't have that info from Todd. Oftentimes, we will use another bus or hang on to another bus. They'll, what they call cannibalize it or part it out. Or sometimes they'll trade it in or sell it. So I'll find out from Todd what the plan is, if they're going to be.
But this is part of our
Right.
replacement
Right,
cycle.
replacement, right. So it's not like we're
part of the
growing our
cycle.
bus fleet, it's
Correct.
over time. And we're only buying one, a lot of times we'll buy, two.
And sometimes they're kept for spares
Right.
until they just can't
Right,
be
our-
run. But
our,
it's not
the
one that
maintenance-
we would want to keep in service necessarily full-time. And so then we will sometimes keep those as spares.
Right, and
as
they'll
well.
use them to get parts out of them. So they do a good job trying to keep the cost of running those buses down, so. Okay,
Okay, so we have a motion that's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is carried 7-0.
okay, so the last thing on our item, we're gonna go to Lynette, is we talked about the state budget that was approved within the last month, and so how that impacts us and our budgeting going forward. So they passed the 25 to 27 biennium state budget in Madison, and so Lynette's gonna kind of walk us through the impacts on our district.
Yes, and there was a document as part of the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting, so that's available if anybody wants to see that. We have that out on our website, or, I'm sorry, as part of the Finance and Facilities packet from last week. And it just sort of highlights some of the key pieces that impact public schools or K-12 schools with the new biennium budget. So one of them is the per pupil adjustment. So under the revenue limit, they did maintain the $325 per pupil for both this year, 25-26, and 26-27. So there will be an increase under the revenue limit of $325 per pupil in each of those years. The low revenue ceiling stayed at $11,000. I think that the thing that we talked about that we need to pay attention to, and that a lot of districts are going to be paying attention to, is that the revenue limit is made up of tax levy and state aid. And when your revenue limit increases, the idea is that both the state aid and the tax levy increase as well to make up that increase. Only this year in the biennium, the state aid was not increased, so there is 0 additional dollars put into state aid. So that means as districts, including River Falls, as our revenue limit increases, that becomes all tax levy, okay? So that's important for us, and we have the little visual on the board here that kind of shows that as that increases.
Lynette, is this how frequently has it happened that the state has not increased state aid at all?
I don't recall.
2011,
2011, they froze and did not increase?
2011, they-
decreased aid.
Okay.
That was,
Okay.
I know they decreased the revenue limit
and
then,
they cut aid.
and
It's the only
cut
time
the
in
aid.
my career
Okay.
that I'm
Okay.
Yeah, so it's been a minute since they've done that.
So,
So, yeah, go ahead.
what, and this, I said this at the committee, but I think it bears repeating, because this is what every school district in the state is realizing right now, and the buzz is out there. So the state said we can get an extra $325 per pupil, and as you say, that typically comes part from property tax, part from state aid. This year, the state decided not to take any state funds, okay? However, they are doing a almost $5 billion income tax cut. So what's going on in an awful lot of people's minds, myself included, is that personal income tax cuts at the state level, which are really popular, and the governor and the legislature agreed to this, are translating increasingly into property tax increases all across the state. So as people see their property taxes going up, I just want to remind everybody, but you got an income tax cut from the governor and the legislature. It's not a good way to fund schools, but it seems to be a popular way to run state budgets because it's been a trend. This isn't the first year that we've seen state aid not be what we thought it was going to be, but still income tax cuts coming from Madison. So I think it's important, and it bears repeating. I'll probably say it some more times. This is being repeated in school districts all across the state as school boards and administrations are realizing this is the reality. When you get an income tax cut at the state level, watch out, because probably that's going to be made up somewhere else. And in this case, it's coming from property taxes, which are
Right.
tough taxes
So
to
it's
handle.
transitioning from a more progressive taxation methodology to a more regressive taxation.
I think most people would see it that way, probably, yeah.
Yeah. If
So
you're earning
for-
money.
Yeah, so, I mean, we're glad that the $325 per pupil, there was a per pupil increase. We're glad, that's what we were sort of planning on, because in the last biennium, it was written into the law for 400 years. So we've kind of kept that in our planning. So we're glad that that was kept and not reduced.
I wonder if there are districts that are choosing not to increase the revenue limit by 325. Yeah. If they're choosing not to because it's going to add to property taxes. But then, of course, then that just drives them further in the hole, more to the bottom of the list, I suppose.
So,
We're already
in other
enjoying-
words, under levying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess we'll find out. But,
Yeah.
You know, levies are set in October, so districts have several months to sort of figure
Yeah.
all that out.
But-
I don't, historically, there have been very few districts that under levy, very few.
Right.
And it's usually very extenuating circumstances.
Yeah.
Having said that, because I'm concerned about, but this was a budget deal, and I do want to say, I appreciate the fact that the governor and the legislature came together and cut a deal and got us a budget almost on time, just within just a few days being on time, which I think a whole bunch of people didn't expect, so I appreciate that. And the fact that I think in the end, we got more than I thought we were going to get about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And both of our state senator and our state representative, both are on the Joint Committee on Finance, which originally we're not going to, we're not agreeing to as much money as eventually came through. And I think it was a lot of people locally here, especially across the state, who followed up with those legislators and made the case for public schools. We did better than I had feared we were going to get 3 weeks ago. So that's the good news. And I appreciate that support from our legislators.
What was your fear, that the special ed funding would not be as good as it was?
Right.
And the special ed funding is great.
Right. The special ed funding was 10% more than I thought, than the recommendation was in early June. 10 percentage points higher. So that's good news. The tough news is just the fact that it's coming out, the increase that we're getting right now is coming out of property taxes, and that's tough. But it's better than
Sir.
what it was a month ago, so.
Those are, I just wanted to clarify, those are two separate
Buckets
buckets
of money.
Yep.
of money, so.
The other thing that's
The special.
Special ed.
Yes.
Revenue limit increase of
Yep.
325.
And special ed.
And the special ed
Yep.
reimbursement.
And that, thank you for that.
Yep.
Tee up for transition, so
The
then when we
revenue
look.
limit isn't money, just says we can increase our levy by so much.
Correct. Well, I mean, as it increases, that means districts have more money to spend.
Oh, it just gives us the opportunity to increase our levy by 325.
Correct.
We could turn that opportunity down.
Correct.
So it's not real money, it's
Right.
money we get to tax
turn it
people.
We could.
No, the problem with that is that's how the districts that, I mean, when this thing started in 93, those districts that had been running conservatively.
Like us.
And the baseline was set, they're the ones that have been struggling for the
Yes.
last 30 years.
Right.
The other thing that's happening in town that people I think are a little miffed at or confused is they're getting their assessments, and the assessments are going through the roof, and people are kind of saying, hey, that's gonna increase my taxes by the, sort of they see us potentially increasing our taxes or take 325 going to local property taxes. But it's important for them to understand that it's all relative to everybody else, right? So if yours went up a significant amount, 20, whatever the average is, 36% or something, but everybody else is going up too. So the total amount of money we're collecting is no different than it would have been if the assessment hadn't happened. It's just, so, people
Yeah.
are seeing their taxes, their assessment going up 36%, they're equating that to their taxes going up 36%.
If your house evaluation went up a greater percentage than the entire equalized value of all the property in the
Right.
district, then you will pay more
Yes,
taxes.
you will.
Yeah.
But if yours was the same or
And
less,
you would have.
then you would have, yeah.
Right.
So that's a good way to, I don't know if it says on there, or we know what the total equalized value is yet.
The challenging piece to all of this is there's still so many variables to predict. We won't know until a lot more variables are decided, how all these things are impacted. We need to understand what our exact equalization aid is. We need to understand what our exact membership is.
Yeah.
We need to understand what the total equalized value is. So all these things are hypotheticals right now that, that stress us in our planning,
Yeah.
because we've already started spending in this fiscal year. But that's just the nature of the work and the cycle of the work that we have. And I think in the next few months, some of these impacts will become more clear, and
Right.
we'll have those recommendations, whether it's the month before the annual meeting or at the annual meeting, what our recommendations will be on these items.
So then if we move to what we've kind of been hinting at with special education aid, so we did see an increase, and this is, I haven't seen anything like this in my time, such a high percentage increase. So right now, or in the past, for example, last year, the goal was to reimburse at a percentage of 33%. What we saw was 30.6%. So because it's a sum certain allocation, that means that they set aside a pot of money that they think will reach a 33, I'm talking about last year, 33% reimbursement. When we're all said and done and everyone's reporting their expenses, that pot of money only reimbursed at 30.6%.
30.6% of what? Total cost of educating that special ed child?
Of their their
Reimbursable
qualifying
special education.
special education services or expenses.
For our school district, we're expecting.
For any district, all districts.
We're expecting to get about 30% of our cost,
That was
Reimbursable
last year.
cost.
Right,
reimbursable
so
cost for
last-
special ed reimbursed to us.
So now in the new biennium budget, they've set a new goal of 42% for this year and 45% of next year. They've never met the goal because it's still some certain.
Some certain.
And so what we're expecting is it will be closer to 40% when we're all said and done. So that's what we're using, and we're glad for that, because what it means, it doesn't mean that the district has additional money in general fund. What it means is we can retain those funds
More of
in
it.
the general fund instead of transferring them to Fund 27. The board made, passed the priorities of staffing, and compensation. And so those were our priorities, and that's what we were budgeting for. And we were prepared to make reductions in other parts of our budget had the special ed funding not been increased. What this means for us is we can reinstate those reductions that we were prepared to make. So it's not that we now have $600,000-$700,000 more to do something else with. It's really just replacing what
We
we
can
were
cut
prepared
less.
to reduce. Correct.
And is there any federal funding that comes into the state for special ed that is maybe not coming?
We have not heard
cuts to the
special
Department of
ed
Education.
federal funding. But what we've heard are the title funds. So
Yep.
Title 2A, Title 3A, and Title 4A pertain to River Falls.
Yep.
And in total, that's about $80,000 that is on hold.
Right, it's not necessarily cut, it just, the funds have not been released.
But I wonder,
So
I
we
wonder
need
about
to-
special
So
ed.
normally, this is the time where we would get a notification of what our allocation would be for
Yeah.
25, 26. And so right now, we're budgeting that we will not see those funds. If they end up coming in, great, but, and we're not reducing the programs that those funds have been supporting, but we will be using other funds just to support those programs, so. I think the last thing on here that sort of impacts, or a couple things that impact our district are the open enrollment increases. So we've been seeing sort of this reverse of open enrollment in versus out. For a while, River Falls had additional open enrollment in versus out. We're seeing that shift a little bit. And so as the reimbursement rates or the open enrollment rates increase, and our numbers are increasing out, now our loss, if you will, on open enrollment students is going to be increasing, is what we're seeing. And those are, again, using our estimated numbers for enrollment and open enrollment and all of that. And if you recall, open enrollment essentially has a cutoff date, but then there's the alternative open enrollment throughout the entire year. So that's fluctuating all year long. And then the last piece is the increases in voucher reimbursements. And we talked a little bit about how this works, right? Because we saw our first state aid reduction this past year for voucher students. And there were 3 students, so we saw a state aid reduction of about $30,000. And what you don't see when we get the state equalization aid certified to us, we don't see that on there. So when districts receive their aid statement, it will say the full aid amount. But then on the revenue limit worksheet, it will show that at the end of this happens at the end of the year, there's a reduction for those voucher students. And so what happens is we don't actually get the full amount of aid that was certified at the beginning of the year. There's a reduction, but what we are allowed to do is then make ourselves whole by taxing for that
Real
amount.
estate taxes.
So essentially, the tax levy increased by that $30,000 last year in order to make our revenue limit whole, because we were losing that on state aid. So that's really how the voucher.
For private charter school students.
Correct.
And when do we find out how many voucher students we're gonna have?
Voucher, yeah. We want to make sure that,
Okay.
so
Just-
that's the way the state is funding students who are private voucher school students.
Correct.
Is
Coming right off the
through
top of the money that would go
state
into
aid.
education, right? At the state level, and then we're allowed to make up for that by taxing more on the levy.
Correct.
Yeah. Just as a reference point too on special education, in 1973, it was 70% support from state aid for special education.
That pot of money went a lot further, right?
It did, it's increased, I mean, in the numbers of kids.
So with that, and then the other document that was part of the finance and facilities meeting last week was just another estimate. So now that we are using the numbers in the biennium budget, the new biennium budget, gave a new estimate of budget projections, just a quick summary. That's all I had.
Great, that was the last on our
Okay,
agenda.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you. Thank you for helping us make sense of complicated information. All right, we are going to move on to the Personnel Committee. I'm going to give a summary and a report of what we did, and then we will take the action. So the Personnel Committee met on July 14th. During that meeting, Nate provided a certified staffing update. Things are looking very promising from that standpoint. It would not be a complete surprise to have some last-minute adjustments, but at this point, we're holding steady, right? Okay. We also reviewed changes to the substitute employee handbook for the school year 2025-26, and the committee recommends that the full board adopt those adjustments.
Just to be clear, it's a handbook for substitutes. It's not a substitute for the employee handbook.
It's a substitute,
Right,
Alan.
Right,
It's a-
right. Just, all right.
so all
Clarification.
people who come in who are filling short-term sub roles in the district find information in this handbook. Do you want to add anything to that summary? All right. Okay. We also reviewed and made some adjustments, reviewed the recommendations to the appendices to the employee handbook for 2025-26. And again, the committee recommends that the board approve them. These are changes that reflect what needs to be done for the next school year. And then the committee also discussed revisions to an existing job description to really better meet the district's needs. So the position is now going to be called a health services paraprofessional float position, not an aid position. Nate, do you want to say anything more about the need for that change?
That minor change was meant to ensure that people understood the float position, which is a position that isn't centered at any one school like the other health paraprofessional positions. This person works one day at Greenwood, maybe the next day at the Montessori, part of that day could be at the high school, and really goes where it's needed based on the needs of the students, and also acts as a substitute if one of our existing health paraprofessionals happens to be out that day.
And since we have a number of students who have some significant medical needs, we need to have a person who is in this position and trained to be able to go where we need them.
Right,
Correct?
mainly because our health aide would have to vacate the office at their school,
And
leaving
then,
those, all of the rest of the students without support during that time.
What are the requirements when we hire a health aide? Do they have to have any sort of medical background?
They don't. Karen, our registered nurse for the district, is able to provide them the level of training that's required for them to do that job.
all right, because it's the season of handbook, at this point, is there a motion to, I'm going to take numbers 1 and 2 together, a motion to approve revisions to the substitute employee handbook as presented, as well as revisions to the employee handbook appendices as presented.
So moved.
Second, whatever.
Was that you
It was
first,
me
Lindsay?
and then Allison.
Okay.
Or Alan, take your pick.
I didn't hear him.
I've got you, Allison. All right. Any questions or comments on that? They were modest adjustments. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. And now is there a motion to approve the health services paraprofessional float job description as presented? Thank you, Ellen.
Second.
Okay, Monica? Questions or comments on this? I think this is a really good revision for the district that's going to serve the needs of our students well. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed, the motion is carried. All right, we have one last handbook that we need to consider tonight, and that will be the 2025-26 Renaissance Charter Academy Student Handbook. Everything is right in our board packet. I'll take a motion to approve that handbook, and then we can have discussion.
So moved.
Thank you, Allison. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Monica. Questions or comments about any of the recommendations?
A lot of work that went into this. Really appreciate the amount of work that went in.
I just asked a question of Dave earlier about the changes that were made since Peggy's not here, but I was curious to know whether or not these are changes that reflect current practices, or if these changes that will be implemented for the first time this year. And it sounds as though these changes reflect current practice. And my general sense in reading through this handbook is that the expectations are being elevated. And so I was really pleased to see that. And I think these are really positive changes that are being made, and trust that Peggy and her staff will be able to help students,
And will impact culture.
Yeah, one thing I'd highlight is they earned a grant for that vape sensor. And so she has language in there for how that will be managed. And we're gonna carve out some time within Ed Pro, just so the board can understand how that device can help us with enforcing policies that we have in place.
You're doing some important work, the Renaissance, and it's nice to be able to try these things out in a smaller school. All right, we have a motion that's been moved and seconded. Anything else? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? The motion is carried. All right, we have the first reading of revised school board policy 431 related to student attendance, and I'm going to turn to Dave to ask him to walk us through the proposed revisions, and then I will take a motion.
You thought we would get out of the policy game for a little bit, but you were wrong. This policy has been chatted about at the admin level, and we recognize that this is an important update, one, because we see it as a priority, and two, because we saw the current policy maybe didn't fully consistently be organizationally aligned, which is what we talked about a little bit later. So what we wanted to do was keep the integrity and all of the language around state statute correct, but also maybe offer some more clarity. So across our district, we had some consistent attendance policies. And what I would highlight is once we approve this as a school board, wheels are turning to make sure that at every level, at every school, communication processes are in place. So it's not just like we're gonna flop the 8-page attendance policy in front of families and everyone impacted. We're gonna have that available, of course, but we're also gonna have through a website and through one-page documents and through communication through newsletters and all of those different systems to try to do a really good job of making sure that everybody understands what our attendance policy is, so there's clarity. So that's the first piece. So you won't see any yellows on here because we just kind of identify this as a full rewrite of the current policy, even though there's probably some language that's exactly the same. We just wanted to make sure that people are aware that this is a pretty massive overhaul. So starting with the first 3 paragraphs before we get to the parts, the first 3 paragraphs, to summarize what's there, is it calls out specific state statute language around attendance, and then it identifies the broad responsibilities that the school has and parents have related to school attendance. Is there any questions on those?
I had a question, the third paragraph, it calls that specifically out 5-year-old kindergarten, and I was curious to know,
That's
due to state statute, we basically have different expectations
Yep.
for 5-year-olds versus 6-year-olds,
4-year-old,
even though they're all
4-year-olds.
in kindergarten.
Okay, so it's called out as 5-year-old kindergarten to compare it to 4K.
That's 4K, okay.
Yep, that's why
That was
it's
another
called out.
question I had.
Yep.
Okay, great.
And the statute, there's probably some outdatedness to the statute versus when 4K came into to place. We have the same sort of attendance expectations around how we identify what is excused and unexcused and how we identify truancy and those things. That's called out, when we talk about 4K, that's called out in either the contract that we have with the provider, or if it's one of our spots, then we're gonna apply this
Okay,
policy.
perfect, thank you.
All right, so the next section is the definition. So part 1, we just said, let's start with clearly identifying these topics. And when I say we, I just wanted to clarify that lots of conversations with administrators, with feedback to those who are really charged with doing this work. So a lot of it is our attendance secretaries as well. So the first piece is an excused absence, and basically a student is excused when they have an acceptable excuse, and part 4, which I'll get to, identifies all the ways that you can be excused. And one thing that we really wanted to define was the length of the day that we would count as an excused absence. And so basically, if you have a legitimate excuse and you're 15 minutes to 50% of the school day gone, we're counting that as a half day towards your absence limits. And if it's greater than 50%, then we're counting that as a full day towards your absence limits. And so that allows the attendance officer and the people that support the attendance officer to consistently across buildings identify how long an excused absence is. Prior to this, each school used a different method to calculate allowable absences. So at some schools, if it was greater than 50%, that was one full day. At other schools, they were using a method similar to this, and so we wanted to make sure that we were consistent across buildings. Is there questions about that?
So if a kid's 20 minutes late for school.
With an excused absence,
Right.
then that would be, whatever that excused absence would be, that would be counted as a half a day
What
towards
if
that.
what if a student left to go to a dentist appointment or some sort of a
Yep.
doctor's appointment
Yep.
during the day and it's more than 20 minutes? Is that a half day?
So if they come with a verified doctor's note, that's an exempt absence that
Okay.
doesn't count towards any of these. Good questions.
And just again, as you're discussing these, you said it's not yellow. So this, it's not as if we didn't have an attendance policy before, and this is all new. This is a rewrite
This is a
of what
big
we've
rewrite.
had.
Yep.
This is a big rewrite.
It's all yellow.
Yep. So then we talk about a non-excused absence, which is pretty straightforward. That means they don't have an acceptable excuse. I'll talk a little bit later about what that does. By state statute, if you're unexcused for greater than 15 minutes, when we start to talk about truancy and habitual truancy, anything greater than 15 minutes is counted towards one of your unexcused absences. So that's why that's defined in that way. So there's a little bit of difference between an excused absence versus an unexcused absence. So we want to be clear with that. Habitual.
I'm confused. The excused absence, Mike, you asked the question, if I go to a doctor's appointment and,
That's in
That's
part
a-
four.
that's a
Give
different-
me-
Oh, that's
Give me
different.
part four.
okay,
Give me till part four, and that way
Okay,
we will not be
gotcha.
confused. I promise.
okay,
I shouldn't say I promise, but I hope.
okay.
So unexcused absence, we talked about habitually truant. Now, that is if you are unexcused for all or part of 5 days within a school semester. Why habitually truant is something that we want to define is because at that point, the district, if it follows some other steps that I'll talk about, could move towards a citation, whether that's through the county or through the city. And I'll talk about the other steps that we do and all the things that we do to try to to prevent that from happening, because that's our end goal, is to prevent that from happening. But we define habitually truant as if you are unexcused absence for all or part of 5 days within a semester.
How does that translate, like at the elementary level, where they're on
Still halfway through the
trimesters?
school
You
year.
just
Yep.
mark the halfway point, okay.
Good question. Tardy late arrival, that covers that period of 1 to 15 minutes. So that might be excused, or that might be unexcused. If you have an excused absence with less than 15 minutes, or an unexcused absence with less than 15 minutes. That's kind of the, I'll use the word grace period, those are my words. Any questions on the definitions? Okay, we can circle back when we get to some of the other parts. The next, part 2 and part 3 are very straightforward, and again, pretty much cut right from state statute. One identifies who the school attendance officer is and what their role is. And at every building, we have an identified school attendance officer. It's normally the principal or assistant principal. And then they normally have a designee that supports that work for them. And then in part 3, it just identifies the fact that a parent or guardian is required to provide notification of an absence. If they don't do that, then we assume it's unexcused, and we have a whole bunch of systems to verify that the child is safe and all those steps. Any questions on part 2 or part 3? Awesome. All right, here we go, part 4. This is probably the part where we had a lot of discussion on and just clarification on, and we did a lot of research around different school districts and a lot of different work. So state statute does do some nice things to identify what's an excused absence, but then they also have a lot of local control to clarify how you're going to define if that is covered under that excused absence or covered under a different excused absence. So the way our policy reads now is the first reason that you can be excused from school is that you're not in a proper physical or mental condition to attend school. I'll just use the word ill from now on when I'm describing that, so everybody understands what I'm talking about. So if a child is ill from school, they can be excused from school. So how do we know that the child is ill, right? So 4.1a says that a parent or guardian for all or part of 4 school days per year can excuse their child from being ill from school, okay? So when we talk about that proration, this is where it comes in. If it's a parent excused, hey, David is sick today, and it was greater than 50% of the day, then that is one of the parent's 4 opportunities to identify their child as ill, okay? That is what I would say is a unique component to our attendance policy that is not in lots of school district policies. And so in other school district policies, they wouldn't have any carve out for a parent to be able to excuse their child as ill. They would have the expectation that A, there was a doctor's note that identified that the child was ill, or B, the absence would be coded as reason number 3 in this part, which is a parent or guardian can excuse their child for any reason for up to 10 days. It can get confusing, and we try to recognize that there's lots of different situations, and we also understand that sometimes a child is ill and it may not require that person to go to a doctor. And so in past practice, this district has allowed some level of parent ill. We've had a long conversation about what is the appropriate amount, how do we calculate them with the prorations? And what we've landed on in this new policy is that it's 4 per year. That's different. It used to be 4 per semester, okay? But we were all over the board on how we prorate. So now we're gonna be consistent with how we prorate and do it 4 per year. So I got a lot of parent feedback on this piece of the puzzle. And a big piece of the puzzle is it's challenging because sometimes not all illnesses require a doctor visit, and everybody's all over the board with how accessible they are to having a doctor visit. And so we did 3 or 4 things within the policy to kind of recognize that. The first thing is we purposely use the word may, so the student attendance officer has the discretion around requirement of doctor's notes. So in section B, the district may request the parent or guardian obtain a written statement. That gives the attendance officer the discretion to understand if there's a unique circumstance that we wouldn't require a doctor's note in that
It
situation.
may create a financial burden for a family.
Yes, I'm gonna speak to that in a second, that potentially could be the case. But I also wanted to recognize that in addition to these 4 illness excuse days, parents can also lean on their 10 parent excuse absence days if they feel obtaining a doctor's note is not necessary or not feasible. So now we have 4 illness excuse days and 10 parent excuse days, which means essentially from a parent alone, a student could be gone 14 full days out of 175, which is about 8%, which is getting close to what we kind of are identifying as chronically absent. So we just want to recognize that while it is the 4 excuse, they also have 10 optional days too that they could also use. And in a lot of districts, this 4 isn't even there, it's just all the 10. So that's the second piece. There's 2 other pieces that I wanted to highlight around absences. The next one is that if your child has a chronic condition, you can obtain a doctor's verification that could excuse the student for a period of time of 30 days. And that would cover all absences for that illness reason for that 30-day period. And our school nurse has the discretion to extend that. So if you're dealing with something like, I'll just use an example, influenza, okay? So you could get a doctor's note and that would say, David is recovering from influenza and he, over the next 30 days, may be ill. And now that's the certified doctor's note that the parent could say, hey, he's still recovering, that's one of these days. So that's a 30-day period. Zach Campbell, who is at the high school, as well as our district nurse Karen, reached out to our district physician and had conversations about what that form could look like, and we wanted some consistency around that form. So building to building, if you have kids at multiple levels, you would know what that absence verification form. But that's another way that we could encounter that issue of maybe something that's ongoing and chronic, that doesn't really fit under, hey, you don't have to always go to the doctor for this, but we would want to have some recognition of a chronic condition. So that's another way that we're recognizing there's, it can be confusing. It seems, your kid's sick, but there's some layers to this. The last piece is, if your child, I always say child, if your child becomes ill while at school, office, staff, and the parent or guardian would work together. They would speak prior to the student leaving, and if both parties agree, the office staff agrees and the parent agree that the child is ill, then the parent would, then that would be an excused absence. And we have some pretty clear guidelines on if you're throwing up, or if you have a fever, there's some pretty clear guidelines that your child can't be in school. And so what we're saying with that is, if that's the case, then that wouldn't be counted towards one of your 4 parent illness absences, because that was something that the school is basically saying, hey, your child's got to go home. But one thing that's clear there is that sometimes, most often at the high school level, a parent might call in and say, hey, I heard David is sick, I'm gonna send him home. Well, to have this be the case, David's gotta go to the office, and David has to be recognized as being too sick to be at school, for that to be an excused absence. Parent can still call him out, it's just gonna be used on one of those excused absences. So that's kind of the way that we encountered that, and how that's outlined. There's a lot of nuance to it, but we felt like it was important to kind of spell that out. Are there any questions on illnesses, excused absences? Okay, so number 2 there is, I already touched on this, that's if your student is experiencing a chronic condition, you can be absent from school, and the process on how you would obtain that illness verification form, and the big positive step forward that this chronic form, this chronic or extended illness, those are 2 different things, verification form would be consistent district-wide. So the next thing is number 3 in part 4, and this one is, again, very aligned to state statute, which says students can be excused in writing by their parents or guardians before the absence for any reason. So they don't, and it can be for anything. We give some examples of what that could be there, what it most often is. And one thing I would clarify there is proration is the same. So 15 minutes to 50% is half of your 10. Greater than 50% is 1 of your 10. Are there questions on that? Number 4 is the potpourri of all the other options that wouldn't count against your 10 parent excused or your 4 illness days.
That would
that are
or
excused.
would not?
Would not.
Not.
Yep. And again, this is maybe something that's different than other districts. Some other districts might, for example, if it was a death in the family, that would just be in the general bucket of 10. We're calling that out as something different.
Okay, it's interesting there. Sounding taps.
Yeah,
That must be statute
That's
somewhere.
right out of
Is that-
statute.
Yeah. If a student is
Playing
tasked
taps.
to play taps during a military honors funeral or for a deceased veteran, that's
100%,
excused.
100%.
Yeah, that's interesting, I know.
A special interest thing by someone that put it in there. Of course, we would do that either way, but it's a statute, so we're for sure gonna do it now.
Do you have to define immediate family, or is that defined somewhere? Death
we
of
have-
immediate family,
We have allowed,
kind of broad definition. Step siblings. or
Grandparents.
Step parents.
Aunts and uncles.
if you would like, we can put that in policy. We've tried to allow that to be the discretion of the
flexible.
student
Yeah.
attendance officer, but we can definitely.
Sure, no, I think it's fine. I was just curious whether it was identified in the state law.
It's not. Okay, part 5 is just said, okay, so what does it mean to be unexcused? I think the most obvious unexcused is you're not here and your parents, without your parents.
Parents think you are.
Right? Right, so that's the most one that we traditionally think of, but there are other ways that you can be unexcused. You can be with the consent of your parent, but the absence doesn't fall under any of the reasons that we have in part 4. Or you are with the consent of your parents, but you've exceeded the allowable limits of the absences that you have per year. So you're above your 10 or whatnot. So those are the things that would be considered unexcused.
My kid skipped school, my brother skipped school once because my mom said he couldn't buy one of those airplanes that you know, one of those foam ones that you throw. So I'm riding the bus home, my brother's on his bike riding home with an airplane under his, skip school. Skip school, where does that fall?
That would be an unexcused absence. You were
He had to write a letter of apology to Mrs. Steinmetz was the principal at Greenwood.
Oh my goodness.
My dad was on the school board at the time.
Good thing they had a good
It's
policy.
still a family, we still have family laughs about that one.
The next piece there with unexcused is we support our admin in taking attempts to deter it, like writing apology letters and whatnot. Tardiness and late arrival is defined there. Are there any questions on part 5 or part 6? Okay. Part 7, makeup work and examinations. The thing I would highlight with part 7 is that students who are absent from school, whether the absence was excused or unexcused, are permitted to make up coursework and examinations during the missed time period.
They
So-
are excused or unexcused?
Yep. It is the student's responsibility to contact their teachers to determine what that coursework is, and there's specific school procedures that are outlined in the handbook on how to do that and how much time you have to complete the makeup work and all of that fun stuff. Any questions on part 7? Okay, part 8 is promotion, monitoring, and intervention. These are the proactive steps that the district is committed to ensure that the high levels of attendance for all kids. So one piece is that we strive to have a welcoming and engaging school environment. We want kids to want to be here. We want to have activities that are interest to them so they attend, as well as an engaging curriculum. So that's there. The next piece is we would have school-based disciplinary actions to deter truancy. So in those initial steps, if you accumulate too many tardies or if you have unexcused absences, there are detentions, there are other interventions at that level that we would take to make truancy not feel like a fun thing. And then obviously, this is probably one of the things that is a huge piece of a school administration and a school office is constant monitoring and targeted assistance. So student attendance is monitored continuously prior to any referral to municipal or county for habitual truancy. The attendance officer designee is going to provide targeted assistance for students who are needing additional support, and some of the examples of what that could look like are there. So the idea here is that we want to do everything proactively to avoid kids being gone from school, because we know the impact of kids being gone from school on their overall student success. And so those things are in place. And we clarified that so that we had some good admin level conversations about making sure that all these things at some level, unique to each building, are happening. And they are, but this is a good way to clarify and have good conversations about what's working at some buildings and what could work at other buildings. Part 9 talks about communication, just the different ways that we communicate with our families about absences. So you're going to get an absent report on your report cards. That's a nice thing to keep track of. You're going to get a notice of unexcused absence, and the methods, the potential methods are identified there. You're also going to get notice when you're getting close to your maximum allowable excused absences, or you've reached your maximum allowable absences. So hey, heads up, you've had your 10. Anything beyond this is going to be an unexcused absence. That's the way that we partner with parents to make sure they're aware of where they sit. And obviously, through Infinite Campus, a parent can check their child's attendance whenever they want. Part 10 is referral to municipal or county court for habitual truancy. So Part 10 just identifies if the student is at risk for becoming habitually truant, and which means they're almost at 5 or at 5, this thing has to take place before we would make any final referral to municipal or county court. This was another good conversation at every level, making sure that we're consistently communicating what is taking place at these meetings, and how we make sure that these meetings we make every effort to have them. It doesn't mean that every meeting takes place. The district's responsible for providing a notice and doing everything they can to meet, but sometimes it doesn't happen, but we have to demonstrate and document that we've done that.
And we're
we've gone through
required.
these questions.
We're required to
That's
notify the
correct.
county.
Yep.
Because then that can lead to issues with the county intervening with child, should this child be in this home if the parents can't make sure the child gets to
Right.
school and things
Right.
like that.
Yep. And then the final intervention, we would just make sure that we have, the notice was provided. We've also met, all those things have taken place. We really want to be tight with that. So when we get to that final unfortunate level, we've done everything we can. Part 11 is specific to middle and high school and just talks about extracurricular participation and identifies the link to attendance. And then part 12, and I will put the caveat in the next month, we might make some adjustments to part 12. We hemmed and hawed if this was even necessary to be in the policy. But we think it's important that if somebody looks at that, they can understand kind of how to read the attendance policies. Because things that are exempt, and this, now I'm gonna circle all the way back to, we talked about doctor's note, right? If you have a doctor's note, that's exempt, so it doesn't count towards those allowable absences. If it's excused, it does, right? And then unexcused is noted as well. Are there questions on any of those last steps? Sorry, that was long.
It is a thorough policy.
Wow, that's great.
Well, I would make a motion that we approve it for first reading.
Thank you, Allison. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ellen. Questions or comments about the first reading? I appreciate the consistency and that you really have gone through everything is well outlined, it's comprehensive.
It is
And
comprehensive.
it'll be well, I like your, do you want to mention that you're going to make a one-page summary for?
I think that's important. It's interesting because there's a fair amount of our families that don't encounter this, and if they do encounter it, it might just be on a one-off weird year where everything comes together at once. But then there are other families that we would want to have consistent ways to communicate them so they understand how we keep track of these things.
So there will be a one-page summary, that's where you're going with that?
Yep, exactly.
And that one-page summary will be shared widely with parents and.
Yeah, and it won't just be a one-page summary that's shared widely.
Sure.
We're developing a whole website.
Yep.
That would provide greater detail, and then we would leverage other communication methods, newsletters, social media, those types of things to share that out.
With the increased consistency across all of our school sites, do you anticipate, hopefully just this first year, if it even happens, but do you anticipate more families being notified that they have reached their allotted?
I wouldn't even predict, and the reason
Okay.
why I say I wouldn't even predict is because we reduce the number of parent, 10's always been 10. So I don't know if that will be impacted. Maybe districts, schools are paying closer attention, and I'm not quite sure, but pretty sure 10's 10. So where that's the difference, but then to the flip side of that, we've kind of clearly defined how we prorate them, and that might change how certain buildings are counted. It's hard to predict.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, we want a policy that
Yep.
helps, partners with parents, but also helps everybody understand, hey, best case scenario, David is in school.
It seems to me this policy does that. I appreciate your ability to recognize that all families are in different circumstances and things come up, and you've, provided some layers there, but also emphasizing that it's important that we have kids, in our buildings learning as often as possible. So I think this is great.
I appreciate the flexibility that I, as a parent, I can tell my child has a fever and needs to be home without taking them, and you're allowing me to make that judgment.
Because in the end, you don't want them at school if they're not feeling well,
Exactly,
right?
none of us, then it just
That's how
spreads
kids get sick
everywhere.
and teachers get sick and,
Right.
And that mindset makes a whole ton of sense. However, there are.
right, people that push the limit on that and they're.
Right.
But you've allowed it within bounds, and I appreciate that. Anything else?
Can I ask just a general question? This policy is broken out into part 1, part 2, part 3. Is that a feature of policies moving forward? Can we anticipate that kind of a structure broken out?
necessarily.
Okay, it stood out to me as being a little bit different than some of our other policies.
There's
They're organized.
inconsistency, and that'll get cleaned up in NOLA, probably. They transition a lot of these.
Sure.
Well, like the next policy we're gonna look at
I
doesn't have
don't mean to be,
definitions.
I don't mean, what I will say is, Neola, there's a lot of things that will be really good about Neola, but policy is messy. Like,
Yeah.
not every
Just
policy can
inherent.
have like a clear, like, there's just, and I've already noticed that with Neola. It's not, everything's not exactly the same. The part piece did come from the Neola, a Neola sample policy, so that might be parts of some of it, but it's not in every policy.
For such a lengthy policy, it sure made it easier to refer back to, and
Yeah, it's nicely laid
it was
out.
helpful to have that
And
organized.
with the titles matching the parts.
There's two lines in the second introductory paragraph that I really appreciate. The primary responsibility for regular school attendance of a child rests upon the child's parents or guardian. Okay, I'm glad that's there, it's right up front. In addition, school officials have the legal responsibility to enforce student attendance. This is law. I mean, they've got to be at school. That's why we've got a attendance policy. It's not just, we have a lot of local control in a lot of areas, but parents, it's your responsibility to get them to school, and it's our responsibility to enforce the state law.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. All right, now we have the second reading of the new school board policy 342.11 related to independent educational evaluation. So is there a motion now to approve the second reading of the new school board policy 342.11, independent educational evaluation?
So moved.
Thank you, Allison. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Lindsay. We had a lengthy discussion and presentation on this by Mark Inouye. This is the second time it's come before the board. There have been no changes since the first reading. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is carried. Are there any proposed or suggested items for future board meeting agendas? All right, then we are going to set the next meetings. The Educational Program Committee will meet Monday, August 11th at 6 o'clock. Finance and Facilities will meet Monday, August 11th at 7 o'clock or immediately following Educational Program. Personnel will meet Monday, August 11th at 8 o'clock or immediately following Finance and Facilities. We're getting into this pattern of these triple headers. The next regular school board meeting will be Monday, August 18th at 6.
I
And
thought we moved
everyone,
that to the 25th.
I would have a suggestion, if the board
Yes.
is okay with it, to
Yeah.
move that to the 25th.
I thought, yes,
I thought we did.
the 25th.
Yeah, we had talked about it, but this
regular
action
And then-
will kind of
Yeah.
prove that we're not.
That's the
And then
regular
fourth,
board meeting?
because the week of the
Yes.
18th, you have all those first day things.
Correct.
Nope,
And-
the week of the
no.
18th is the Tools for Schools event, and we didn't want to have
right.
crossover, because
And we're
some of the
gonna be
people at this
component-
table will be working on it.
And remember that next Monday is our board
Board.
retreat. We are starting at 4 o'clock. Lynette made this tour possible, so that should be fun. And with that, the meeting